even if when he died, John Ford was carrying his coffin, and this is 1958, and as they were leaving the soundstage where the funeral took place, someone asked Ford, "What are you doing here?" And Ford said, "I just wanted to make sure the son of a bitch is dead."
Welcome to Locarno Meets, a movie podcast brought to you by UBS from the Locarno Film Festival. 2024 marks the centenary of Columbia Pictures. To celebrate that, Ehsan Khoshbakht has curated The Lady with the Torch, a 40-film retrospective which we'll be showing here at Locarno. Ehsan, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you very much, Alex.
So look, over the last, I presume, year or so, you've been putting together The Lady with the Torch, 40-film retrospective in honor of the 100th anniversary of Columbia Pictures. Just how many movies have you had to watch?
I did something rather crazy. I printed out the release calendar of Columbia Pictures between 1929 and 1959. And I started watching films released per month. So the deal was to watch at least one title release per month. The aim was to get a sense of how studio function and how, in terms of the themes, the stylistic approach to filmmaking, how it changed from almost week to week. With that, I think perhaps I watched around 300 films, and of course a good number of films I had seen before, so I had already marked them. And the plan was to find the right pattern, and the right pattern, as a curator, I like to see how the pattern reveals itself and emerges from the act of viewing, rather than imposing something on the catalog of films you have. And that came out beautifully. It was so clear that there was a program, and there was a good program.
What was the pattern that revealed itself to you?
The pattern that revealed was, I thought, a bit like European Union. Columbia Pictures had freedom of movement. Columbia Pictures was a classless studio. These two were the things that I discovered only when I started watching the titles I had not seen before. So by the freedom of movement, I mean people were not tied to 7-year contracts, which were the standard in Hollywood. So you were just draining someone for 7 years and giving nothing in return. Columbia was, come and make the film, you did it, okay, adios, the next person. Or even week-to-week hire thing, which it allowed many different people, many different talents to pop in and out all the time, the diversity of it. And there was no, I'm too good for B-movies. No. Okay, even Frank Capra, the biggest name of the studio, the major talent, the major star of the studio as a director. He made some wonderful A movies, but he also made some modest B movies. So it was a classless studio. And perhaps the third pattern that emerged, that Columbia was a studio of women for different reasons. Columbia was excelled at making screwball comedies, which are about career women. And there is the reversal of gender roles in screwball comedies. So they were perfect in that. But these films were often also written and, in a very rare case in Hollywood, occasionally produced by women. Columbia Pictures had the first female producer, executive producer in the history of Hollywood, Virginia Van Up. So I thought there is something happening here. And when I looked at the films, I realized they had this sort of tradition of making all-female films. Whatever other studios were making with men, Columbia was making an all-female version of it. Even gangster films and war films. So they were done with women. And this is a very Columbia thing. And we are going to see some examples of that in the program.
And so, okay, help me set the scene. What is it about the formation of Columbia, about the people behind it, that allowed it to take such kind of revolutionary swings?
The lack of resources. It's not for having too many resources unlike Warner Brothers, 20th Century Fox, or Paramount. limited resources. There's not much money. So let's try and see what kind of picture we can make with the resources we have. And when you think about it, okay, maybe we can make the type of picture that we can shoot in 3 rooms. What kind of picture we can shoot in 3 rooms? Screwball comedies. Women and men chasing each other in 3 rooms. And we have some great masterpieces. His Girl Friday, Only If You Could Cook, Awful Truths, and so many other films made with the same simple logic that we don't have elaborate sets. What kind of films we can make? We can make very specific type of comedies that are about gender, about especially in the 30s and early 40s, that how the role is swapped. The female character is the leading force, is someone with great ambitions in her professional life, and the male figure is kind of lagging behind.
And at the time, was this kind of gender flip, as you describe it, kind of greeted with shock or just amusement and happiness?
With amusement and happiness, because again, that's Columbia Picture. Films were made as entertainment. So these are all, regardless of the messages these films have. Of course, there are some darker films in the filmography of the studio, but they were all presented and packaged as some sort of entertainment. There was some always extra element of joy, of thrill, of sometimes in the 30s more risque elements that made it appealing to a large group of people, to the masses.
So, one of the men who set it up, Harry Cohn, is very notorious, famous for, his power and perhaps his vulgarity. And yet he created this studio which seems to work against that, which seems to embrace auteurism, which seems to embrace, gender flipping, that type of thing. What was it about his character that kind of drove Columbia to think in such a fresh way?
I've been thinking about him a lot with the problem of Harry Cohn, because he was a tyrant. There's no doubt about that. But I think he had some sort of inferiority complex. Think about this. He was surrounded by some of the most sophisticated writers from the East Coast.
Where's Harry Cohn from?
He's also from New York, but he was a merchant. He was born and raised on the street, from very modest Jewish background, family of migrants from Eastern Europe. He was not the type of writer that was working for Columbia. He loved them and adored them and humiliated them. But at the same time, you would think that all these sophisticated stars, Irene Dunne, Jean Arthur, they're not just movie stars. They are also very bright, sharp individuals. I think perhaps in a way he was reacting to that. That being said, I think he knew that the only way that the studio could conquer new grounds in terms of cinema and commercial and artistic success was by trusting these figures. And I have heard from many different filmmakers, I've read filmmakers telling the stories about him, that how when he said, John Ford, one of Columbia directors, John Ford said that his nod meant more than a contract drawn by 10 Philadelphia lawyers. His word meant something because he loved making films. He was a problematic character, it's very important to acknowledge that. And he made people suffer, but at the same time, he allowed them to do the things they wanted to do. Even if when he died, John Ford was carrying his coffin, and this is 1958, and as they were leaving the soundstage where the funeral took place, someone asked Ford, "What are you doing here?" And Ford said, "I just wanted to make sure the son of a bitch is dead."
So, yeah, I mean, there is this kind of mixture of resentment and respect, I guess. I mean, another one of his major stars, Rita Hayworth, and they clashed. I think there was a time when she wanted to be in Orson Welles' magic show because they were married at the time, and he refused to let her, so Marlene Dietrich did it instead, and she watched from the wings while every night Orson Welles kind of ranted on about this bastard Cohn, but she continued making movies there and made great movies.
That's true. With Rita Hayworth, it was a slightly different case because Rita Hayworth was the invention of Columbia Pictures and Harry Cohn. Star making at its finest, but also most problematic. So perhaps Harry Cohn felt like, had this kind of Pygmalion complex towards Rita Hayworth. But I think one sees the greatness of Harry Cohn when it comes, because all these cases, they're mostly commercial, artistic, working with the left-leaning writers in Columbia Studios. He had a great degree of tolerance. Like, he knew someone was a communist, and he used to call them, go and write the script ending the sentence, "You red son of a bitch." But he allowed those people to work. And some of the most compelling films in his program are written by those leftist writers when and where Cohn knew their political background. He didn't care. And I think this means a lot because other studios had already panicked. These people were just purging them. The blacklist was serious. But for Cohn, I don't care. I just want the money. You write good pictures, go and do it.
So he spotted a gap in the market. He was like, oh, all this talent's being thrown away. I might as well hoover it up.
I think that could be one of the reasons. But he was also in a case of extreme individualism, that I don't want anyone to tell me who I should hire or whom I shouldn't hire. And I think it was partly that as well. That changed, unfortunately, in the 50s because, the blacklist craze was getting, bigger and bigger and more serious. But he really didn't care, and he just wanted things that would work for the studio, which means first financially, and then he gradually, with the help of Frank Capra, came to realize that there is some glory in winning awards in films reaching perhaps even film festivals. One of the winners of Locarno Film Festival in 1953 or 54 was a Columbia Pictures, The Glass Wall. So, he probably cared about that.
Do you think, surrounded by all that talent and genius, did he develop an artistic sensibility, or was he just innately artistic, but that just wasn't the world he was born into?
He, according to his notes that are preserved and studied and published in some books about the history of the studio, he was a man who understood storytelling. So his footnotes on the scripts shows that he knew what he wanted in terms of the script. Of course, his vision was sometimes too linear. The story goes that he hated flashbacks because they were too confusing for him. But if you look at the Columbia Pictures of the 50s, you have some really complex flashbacks in their films, flashback within flashback. So gradually he embraced that. But he knew and understood the storytelling, but the level of intervention and interference with the process of filmmaking was, in my opinion, compared to other studios, minimal.
Yeah, so what was like a Selznick like compared to him?
Selznick was directing the films. When you talk about a film like Gone with the Wind or any film featuring, of the later films featuring his wife, Jennifer Jones, he was in charge of everything. That was a kind of a different thing. With Harry Cohn, he just wanted to make sure everything is kept according to the schedule and under the budget.
Is that the genius of the system? That's a phrase I keep on hearing around, and I'm no expert, and that's the first I've heard that.
I think the genius of the system is not about what we actually see, is about what we don't see. So we are sitting here. The genius of the system is all these people sitting here. that we don't see. The camera people, the sound people, it has been a streamlined perfection. These are all these kind of artists in their own way, and they contribute to the greatness of the film. And they do it day after day, film after film, and give a sense of a style and coherence to the studio output. So that's the combination of this in front of the camera and behind the camera that have reached perfection.
Am I right in thinking there were only kind of 3 cameramen who shot huge percentages of Columbia film?
There were many more cameramen, but I think Columbia had some records of people shooting close to 200 films. I mean, that's suicidal.
You're going to get good at it if you do 200 films.
Or very bad at it. It really depends, because you might just not have enough time for innovation. It's just a conversation between 2 people. This is the camera setup. I'm going to do this for every single film. There is some danger to it. And you recognize the artist when someone says, we have done it 20 times like this. Now how about doing it differently and finding a new solution to the problem?
So when you were putting together this retrospective, was there anything you were trying to avoid? Because obviously you haven't put in the super canonical films, but Lady of Shanghai is in there. So what's the mix you're going for?
Well, the things that I try to avoid were, first of all, films that have not played in Locarno, in the recent history of Locarno. So that's why Leo McCarey is out, Douglas Sirk is out, and they both had worked for Columbia Pictures. But I also try to avoid films that are easily available, like Gilda, an iconic film. I thought, I can do another Rita Hayworth, another Charles Weider film, the director of the film, and another Virginia Van Opp, the executive producer of the film. So that was one of the criteria, going for the things that people have not seen. Of course, The Lady from Shanghai, people have seen it, but that's, you also need something to introduce the type of audience who are not familiar with it. They want to go for some big classics that they have heard about, and now they want to see it. Why not? I also tried to avoid films that had the Columbia logo, but were not, in fact, entirely Columbia Pictures, because they were also releasing films by other directors. And towards the end of the 50s and throughout the 60s, there was the trend was to offer the films to independent producers. So they were not using any of the resources of the studio. They were shot by different independent cameramen. So it had nothing to do with the studio. It only had the studio logo at the beginning. I tried to avoid that because
you're going for pure uncut Columbia.
Yeah, with the exception of 2 films, just to give a sense of films that were made in some sort of collaboration. A film directed by Nicholas Ray called The Bitter Victory. It's an absolute masterpiece. That's a film that was shot in Europe, right? Nicholas Ray made 3 or 4 films for Columbia, but this was there was no way that Harry Cohn could control this project, so it was shot in Europe, but it was a solo Columbia film. And there's one example that, just as a film by a totally independent director, someone from Czechoslovakia, Hugo Haas. He was very successful in his home country, and then in Hollywood he couldn't work much. So he made a film and then offered the film to Harry Cohn, and Harry Cohn loved it. And they started doing a series of films together, Pick Up. So those films were also, to a great extent, independent. But if you go through the contract, you see that Harry Cohn had a say in the title of the movie, who's going to be cast for it, and things like that. So nobody was entirely free from the long, tall shadow of Harry Cohn over production.
And yet the range of tones that the films are is so incredibly broad. I haven't been able to watch all 40 films, but I've been checking some out, and I'd never seen Murder by Contract before. And it's kind of a masterpiece. It's amazing, and tonally it's so fascinating. It feels like a Soderbergh movie or a Tarantino film, with the way you get this double-crossing murderous bastard chatting about going for swims in the sea and going to the zoo and stuff like that. It feels absurdly 1990s.
Yeah. If I'm not wrong, Martin Scorsese has said that's his absolute favorite American film ever, period. And it makes sense because towards the end of this, this is one of the features of this Columbia retrospective. Towards the end, in the 50s, you see how the directors who had flourished in the B unit of Columbia Pictures, small, low-budget films, they have perfected their style to such extent that it looks so incredibly modern and kind of prefigures the cinema, new American cinema that will arrive a decade or so later. So directors like Bud Whittaker, Irving Lerner, the director of Murder by Contract that you just mentioned, Nicholas Ray, they all became heroes of a generation of directors in the late 60s and 70s. They're absolute gods. And they were all working for Columbia Pictures, making these modest films, genre films, crime film, Western, but with a punch and with an edge that was totally new to Hollywood.
Well, I mean, speaking of Western, Ride Lonesome is it's about as kind of taut a film as you could imagine. It's 70 minutes or something like that, and it's completely non-stop. I don't know. There's just so much kind of energy about it. I loved it.
That's one of the finest examples for me of Bud Whittaker's filmmaking for Columbia. And there are other films like that from that period. They are just so sharp, so precise. And God, they're short. They do a lot in under 18 minutes. And, it shows that the economy of storytelling was just polished so much over the years that they could just deliver almost everything in 75 minutes.
I mean, even when working with, I don't know, Fritz Lang or someone like that, a legend like that, the big heat is, it's tight,
It's 18 minutes or something like that.
It's also maybe the darkest film I've ever seen in my life.
You're absolutely right. That's a film with shocking violence, but the main violence in it is mostly emotional. It's emotionally violent. You will see some horrible physical violence in it too. But Columbia Pictures, after the war, it was a dark place, and they knew how to convey that sense of darkness.
Was there, now looking back, at your long period locked in the Columbia vaults, is there a discovery or something that particularly stands out to you?
Oh, many. For instance, Columbia was very open to exile directors. And when I say exile, most of them are Central and Eastern European Jews who had a history in their own countries as filmmakers or people involved in film production. And when they went to Hollywood, Columbia was one of the places that they ended up in. So Fritz Lang that you mentioned, and Hugo Haas, and John Bram, and many other directors. One major discovery for me, and a film that I believe nobody has seen in a long, long time, and I'm talking about decades, is Girls Under 21 by another German exile director, Max Nossak. This film is an example of Columbia all-girl movies. So this is a gangster film done with women only. So it's about a gang in a neighborhood. They're all girls. The tough girl of the gang is the role model. So it's inspired by a Warner Brothers film called Angels with Dirty Faces with James Cagney. So instead of James Cagney, you have a tough girl in the film, which is so.
Did audiences love that?
Oh, these films were just done with so little money and so fast that they were always returning their investment. So Columbia Pictures was not worried that how are we going to market this film. It was selling okay. It was not that, we have seen an instant classic. No, they were serving a function. But now, today, these films mean more than they did back in 1941.
I was interested to see that You Nazi Spy was the first flagrantly anti-Nazi film released in the States. You were saying that Columbia was working with leftists, and actually even just something like The Lady to Shanghai has an anti-fascist bent. Was there a kind of a through line of anti-fascist work at the studio, or am I reading too much into it?
There was. Take the film that you just mentioned, the short Three Stooges film. I absolutely adore that film. And many of the jokes in that film about Hitler and Mussolini, you see 10 months later in The Great Dictator, including the dance with the globe. So, the Three Stooges, they were Jews. Of course, it meant something to them. But then you have some great writers, John Howard Lawson, Lester Cole. They were all blacklisted in the 50s. They all lost their jobs in the 50s. And here are some of the brightest writers in Hollywood. They wrote all those things. They did. Lester Cole wrote None Shall Escape in 1944. As the war was raging in Europe, this is the film, directed by a Hungarian, André de Toth, that anticipates, in a prophetic manner, the formation of the United Nations and the Nuremberg trials, in which people of different races and countries and ethnicities come together and put the criminals on trial. This is written by Lester Cole. And there is a scene in that film that some Jews are herded into a train to be sent to concentration camp. And a rabbi starts, encouraging people to fight back. Every line that rabbi speaks in the film was plagiarized from a famous speech by a woman, a Spanish Republican during the Spanish Civil War, a communist. Every word that the rabbi says is the words from that woman. This is Lester Cole, who lost his job after the war. The same about Sahara. It's a war film directed by Zoltan Korda. It's one of the finest war pictures set in North Africa. It was based on a Soviet film. There was a clear understanding of the meaning of fascism, mostly through the scripts of these people who were either liberal or leftist, progressive politics, and the directors who some of them had experienced that firsthand. Hugo Haas, whose name I mentioned earlier, he lost his brother in the concentration camp. See, we know about the encounters between a director like Fritz Lang and the Nazi regime. They had an understanding of what fascism and Nazism meant to the world order. So, in my opinion, it was totally conscious and deliberate going for this kind of cinema.